The Hathaway estate stood silent in the fading twilight. Crystal glasses clinked softly. The scent of medicine drifted through the air. Upstairs, Margaret Hathaway, founder of a billion-dollar pharmaceutical empire, prepared to take her nightly dose. But tonight, Ella, a 14-year-old girl and daughter of the housemaid, stared intently at the blue pill. "That isn't your medicine." Everyone froze. James Hathaway, the eldest son, frowned sharply. "What did you just say?" Ella set down the tea tray. "The real pills don't dissolve that fast. Someone's been switching them." The air turned heavy as stone. The private physician swallowed hard. A child had just spoken the words this $100 million family feared most. And in the next few minutes their perfect mask would shatter. Ella lived with her mother in the small quarters behind the Hathaway mansion. Her mother, Mary, had been the longtime housekeeper, kind and honest to the point many considered her naive. Mrs. Margaret, the mistress of the house, had always been good to them both, especially after Ella rescued a cat trapped in the wine cellar. From that day forward, the old woman allowed the girl to occasionally bring tea to her reading room and tend to the garden plants. Ella was a curious child who loved learning. She'd once secretly read old medical journals in the library, learning about drug interactions and side effects. Mrs. Margaret had a heart condition. She took medication regularly, each pill marked by color. One day Ella noticed the pills in the bottle had changed shade from turquoise to a deeper navy blue. When she asked her mother, Mary said, "Don't talk nonsense. They have a private doctor." But something stirred uneasily in Ella's chest. Mrs. Margaret began growing weaker. Her memory faded. Meanwhile, James, the eldest son, seemed unusually impatient during family meetings. The mansion was beautiful, with polished marble floors that reflected chandelier light like frozen water. Portraits of 3 generations lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to watch everyone who passed. Ella had grown up in the shadow of this wealth, but she'd never envied it. She noticed things others didn't: how the staff whispered nervously when James entered a room, how the lawyer visits became more frequent, how Mrs. Margaret's hands trembled when signing papers she barely read. One afternoon, while dusting the study, Ella overheard James on the phone. "The sooner Mother signs, the better. Her condition is deteriorating." His tone was cold, clinical, not the voice of a worried son. That evening, Ella watched Mrs. Margaret take her medication. The pill dissolved almost instantly in water, like soap bubbles disappearing. Real medication had protective coatings. They didn't dissolve that quickly. Ella's heart pounded. She wanted to speak, but who would listen to a maid's daughter? Still, she began keeping a notebook. She recorded the color of the pills, how quickly they dissolved, and the dates when Mrs. Margaret seemed most confused. Mary noticed her daughter's strange behavior. "Ella, what are you doing?" "Watching Mama. Just watching. This isn't our business, sweetheart." "But what if something bad is happening?" Mary pulled her daughter close. "In houses like this, truth can be dangerous. We're here to work, not to question." But Ella couldn't ignore what her eyes told her. The Hathaway family had everything: money, power, respect. Yet beneath the surface of silk curtains and expensive wine, something rotten was growing. Mrs. Margaret had built an empire from nothing. She'd started as a pharmacist in a small town, creating breakthrough treatments that saved lives. Her company now employed thousands. But empires attracted vultures, and sometimes those vultures wore tailored suits and called you Mother. Ella didn't understand everything about wealth and inheritance, but she understood right and wrong, and something here was deeply, terribly wrong. The next family meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. James had mentioned it to the staff. They'd need extra tea service and the good china. Ella made a decision. She would be there. She would watch carefully. Because if no one else was protecting Mrs. Margaret, then maybe a 14-year-old girl with a notebook and sharp eyes would have to. The house continued its whispers in creaking floorboards and hushed phone calls, in pills that dissolved too quickly. And Ella listened to every single one. The Hathaway family meeting proceeded as scheduled. James arrived with his private attorney, discussing updates to his mother's will. Margaret sat frail in her chair, hands trembling as she signed documents without reading them carefully. Ella stood in the corner with the tea service. Her eyes caught the new medication bottle, the label completely different from before. When Margaret took her pill, it dissolved rapidly like foam in hot water. The girl's voice came out quiet, but clear. That isn't your medicine. The room fell into frozen silence. James's eyebrows shot up. What did you just say? Ella lowered her gaze, voice soft. The real pills have a protective coating that prevents rapid dissolution. They can't dissolve that fast. The color is wrong too, the private physician stammered. The child is simply mistaken. But Ella picked up a remaining pill from the box and dropped it into a glass of water. It dissolved completely within seconds. Margaret stared, her clouded eyes suddenly sharpening. My medicine never dissolved this quickly. James's voice came out tight with anger. Be quiet. Who gave you permission to touch anything? But it was too late. Margaret began coughing violently. Everyone panicked. The girl ran to call for emergency services while the adults argued about procedures and family reputation. Within minutes, the elegant meeting room transformed into chaos. The attorney gathered papers frantically. The physician checked Margaret's pulse with shaking hands. James stood rigid, his face a mask of controlled fury. But beneath that control, Ella saw something else: fear. You stupid child, he hissed when no one else could hear. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Ella met his eyes steadily. I saved her life. The ambulance arrived with flashing lights that painted the mansion walls red and blue. Paramedics rushed in with equipment and urgent questions. What medication has she been taking? Everyone looked at the physician, who fumbled with the bottle, reading the label with visible confusion. This isn't what I prescribed. James stepped forward smoothly. There must be some mistake. My mother's been under medical supervision. Sir. One paramedic interrupted, examining the dissolved pill residue. This doesn't look like standard heart medication. They loaded Margaret onto a stretcher. As they wheeled her past, the old woman's hand reached out weakly toward Ella. Thank you, she whispered, barely audible. Mary rushed to her daughter's side, pulling her back as the family followed the ambulance. The attorney lingered, staring at Ella with an unreadable expression. You should be careful, he said quietly. Very careful. After everyone left, the mansion felt hollow. Mary held Ella tightly. What have you done, sweetheart? These people, they're powerful. Someone was hurting her, Mama. I couldn't stay quiet. But at what cost? That night, neither of them slept. Ella kept replaying the moment, the pill dissolving impossibly fast, James's cold eyes, Margaret's grateful whisper. She'd crossed a line that servants weren't supposed to cross. She'd spoken truth in a house built on carefully maintained illusions. The next morning, 2 police detectives arrived at the estate. They wanted to speak with Ella. Mary's face went pale, but Ella stepped forward calmly. She showed them her notebook, dates, observations, the way the pills had changed color and consistency. How did you notice this? One detective asked. I read Mrs. Hathaway's old medical books. I know what her real medication looks like. This wasn't it. The detectives exchanged glances. You're very observant for someone your age. My mother taught me to pay attention. She said it's how we stay safe. They took the remaining pills for laboratory testing. They photographed the empty bottles. They asked questions about James, about the physician, about who had access to Margaret's medication. Ella answered everything honestly. As they prepared to leave, one detective paused. You know this family has significant influence in this city. You might face pressure to change your story. Ella shook her head. I only know what I saw. I won't lie about that. The detective smiled slightly. Good. The truth matters more than power. Remember that. After they left, Mary collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face. They could fire us. They could destroy us. Ella knelt beside her mother. Or maybe for once, someone will be held accountable. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the Hathaway estate. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The house that had stood perfect and untouchable for generations was about to face its reckoning. And it all began with one girl who dared to say, "That isn't your medicine." The police investigation moved swiftly. The private physician was brought in for questioning. Under pressure, he admitted the medication had been changed, under direction from the eldest son. James claimed it was a new version of the drug manufactured by the mother company. But when the laboratory analyzed the pills, they found powerful sedatives, substances that could cause confusion, memory loss, and make someone easily manipulated into signing documents they didn't understand. The new will had been notarized on the exact day Margaret began taking this medication. Ella was called to the police station to give her full statement. She sat across from Detective Morrison, a woman with kind eyes and a notepad covered in careful handwriting. "Tell me again how you recognize the difference." Ella took a breath. "I used to watch Mrs. Hathaway prepare her real medication. The coating on the pills was thicker, slightly cloudy. It took several minutes to dissolve even in warm water. These new ones dissolved in seconds. That's not normal for time-release heart medication." "And the color?" "The original pills were turquoise, a specific shade. The new ones were navy blue, almost dark enough to look purple in certain light. When I held them up to the window, the difference was obvious." Detective Morrison leaned forward. Most people wouldn't notice such small details. Most people weren't raised by a housekeeper who taught them that survival means paying attention to everything. The detective wrote this down, then looked up with respect in her eyes. "You may have saved that woman's life. Is she okay?" "She's in the hospital, responding well to treatment. Her mind is already clearing. The doctors say another month on those fake pills, and the damage might have been permanent." Ella felt relief flood through her chest. Meanwhile, forensic accountants were examining the Hathaway estate's financial records. They discovered that James had been systematically positioning himself to take control of the entire pharmaceutical empire the moment his mother became incapacitated. He'd arranged for offshore accounts. He'd contacted board members about voting her out. He'd even drafted press releases about her declining health and retirement. Everything had been planned meticulously, except he hadn't planned for a 14-year-old girl with sharp eyes and a conscience. 3 days later, James was arrested at his downtown office. The news spread like wildfire. Pharmaceutical heir arrested for attempted fraud. But the headline that caught fire on social media was different. Maid's daughter exposes $75 million will conspiracy. Suddenly, Ella's face was everywhere. News vans appeared outside the estate. Reporters called out questions. Mary tried to shield her daughter from the cameras, but the story was already beyond their control. Inside the hospital, Margaret regained her full consciousness. The sedatives cleared from her system, and with them, the fog lifted from her mind. She remembered everything, the documents James had pressured her to sign, the way her thoughts had felt thick and slow, the sensation of losing herself piece by piece. And she remembered Ella's voice cutting through the haze. "That isn't your medicine." Margaret called for Detective Morrison personally. "I want to press full charges. My son attempted to rob me of my mind, my company, and my autonomy. That child saved me from being a prisoner in my own body." The detective nodded. "We have substantial evidence. But there's something you should know. The girl is receiving threats." Margaret's expression hardened. "What kind of threats?" "Anonymous messages. Pressure to recant her testimony. Someone tried to bribe the mother. Nothing we can trace back definitively, but the implication is clear. Powerful people want this story to disappear." "Then we make sure it doesn't." Margaret's voice carried the steel that had built her empire. "I want private security assigned to that family, and I want my personal attorneys to represent them if needed." "Ma'am, that's generous, but—" "Detective, that little girl did what my entire board of directors, my family, and my own doctor failed to do. She told the truth when it was dangerous. That deserves more than generosity. It deserves protection." Back at the estate, Ella sat with her mother in their small quarters. Mary held her daughter's hands. "The lawyer from Mrs. Hathaway called. She wants to see us." "Are we being fired?" "I don't know, sweetheart, but whatever happens, I'm proud of you. You did the right thing even when it was terrifying." Ella leaned against her mother's shoulder. "I was so scared, Mama. When I said those words, my heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Courage isn't the absence of fear, baby. It's speaking up despite the fear." A knock came at their door. It was Edward, the younger son, a man who'd always been kind but distant, overshadowed by his brother's ambition. "May I come in?" Mary stood quickly, but Edward gestured for her to sit. "I came to say thank you, both of you." His eyes were red-rimmed. "I knew something was wrong. I felt it. But I was too much of a coward to look closely. I told myself it wasn't my business that James knew what he was doing." He looked at Ella directly. You're braver than I've ever been. Ella's voice came out small. I just didn't want her to be hurt. My mother built her company on a simple principle: do no harm. You're the only one who actually lived by that. He placed an envelope on the table. This is from her. She wanted you to have it. After he left, Mary opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a handwritten letter and a check that made her gasp. But Ella's eyes fixed on the words, "You saw me when I was invisible. You spoke when silence was safer. You are proof that integrity isn't about status, it's about character. Thank you for giving me back my life." The investigation continued. More evidence emerged. The conspiracy was deeper than anyone had imagined. But at the center of it all was one unchangeable truth: a child had seen what adults had missed. And her courage had brought an empire's darkest secrets into the light. 1 week later, police discovered additional documents in the Hathaway wine cellar, the same place where Ella had once rescued the trapped cat. Hidden behind vintage bottles and false panels were multiple copies of different wills, each version showing how James had gradually altered his mother's wishes over the course of 2 years. Among them was an original handwritten document from Margaret herself, clearly stating that the majority of her estate would fund a charitable foundation for orphaned children. James had systematically changed it, redirecting most assets to himself. Detective Morrison called Ella and Mary to the station to review the findings. "We need you to confirm something," she said, spreading photographs across the table. "This cellar, you've been inside it?" Ella nodded. "Yes, last year. Mrs. Hathaway's cat got stuck behind some wine racks. I crawled back there to get her out." "Did you see anything unusual?" The girl thought carefully. "There was a small door. I thought it was just storage. It had a lock with numbers on it." "A combination lock?" "Yes. I remember because the numbers were worn down like someone used it often." The detective's eyes lit up. "That's where we found the documents." The combination was Margaret's birth date but written backwards. Mary hugged her daughter close. "You saved her life, but you've also shaken an entire empire." The news coverage intensified. Legal experts appeared on television discussing the case. The pharmaceutical company's stock fluctuated wildly. Board members held emergency meetings. And through it all, people kept asking the same question. How did a child see what everyone else missed? Edward came to visit them again, this time with genuine emotion breaking through his usual reserve. "I need you both to understand something." He sat down heavily, exhaustion written on his face. "I loved my brother. Or at least I loved who I thought he was. Growing up, James was brilliant, charming. Everyone said he'd be the one to take the company to new heights." He paused, staring at his hands. "But somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing our mother as a person. She became an obstacle, a resource to be managed." His voice cracked. "And I was too blind to see it happening." Ella spoke quietly. "You weren't the one who hurt her." "No, but I enabled it by staying silent. By telling myself it wasn't my place to question." He looked at her with haunted eyes. "You're 14 years old. And you have more moral courage than I've shown in 43 years of life." Mary touched his shoulder gently. "It takes courage to admit that." "Does it?" Edward's laugh was bitter. "My mother nearly lost everything because I chose comfort over truth. He gestured to Ella, you chose truth, even though it could have cost you everything." The trial date was set. James's defense team was formidable, expensive lawyers who specialized in protecting wealthy clients. They tried to discredit Ella's testimony, suggesting she was too young to understand what she'd seen, that she'd been coached by police, that her observations were unreliable. But when Ella took the stand, something remarkable happened. The courtroom fell completely silent as she calmly, clearly described the evening in question. "The pill dissolved in approximately 4 to 6 seconds, she said. "I timed it. Real medication with an enteric coating takes 5 to 7 minutes to fully dissolve in room temperature water. I knew because I'd watched Mrs. Hathaway's actual medication many times before." The prosecutor held up 2 pills in clear evidence bags. "And these are, the left one is the real medication. The right one is what Mr. James had been giving her." "How can you tell the difference?" "The coating thickness, the color saturation, and the dissolution rate." Also, if you look closely at the stamp on the side, the font is slightly different. The fake ones were made to look similar but not identical. The jury leaned forward, studying the pills through the plastic. James's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, this is speculation from a minor with no medical training." "Actually," Ella interrupted politely, "I've been reading medical journals from Mrs. Hathaway's library for 3 years. I've studied pharmacology texts, drug interaction guides, and manufacturer specifications. I may not have formal training, but I know what I observed." The lawyer sat back down, clearly unprepared for such composure from a teenage witness. Margaret watched from the gallery, tears streaming down her face. After Ella finished her testimony, the prosecutor presented the evidence found in the cellar: the forged wills, the altered documents, the systematic pattern of deception. James sat motionless, his face an emotionless mask. But everyone in that courtroom could feel the weight of truth settling over the proceedings. During a recess, Margaret was finally allowed to approach Ella and Mary in the hallway. She pulled them both into an embrace, her frail body trembling. "You gave me back more than my life," she whispered. "You gave me back my dignity, my voice, my choice." Ella's own tears finally came. "I was so scared I was wrong. But you weren't. And even if you had been, you cared enough to speak. That's worth more than being right." Edward joined them, placing his hand on his mother's shoulder. "We're family again," Margaret said softly. "What's left of us anyway?" "Because of this brave girl." The prosecutor approached. "We're ready to resume. The defense wants to present their case." As they filed back into the courtroom, Ella realized something profound. The truth wasn't just about the pills or the will or the money. It was about whether anyone cared enough to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And sometimes the smallest voice in the room was the one that mattered most. The case concluded after 3 weeks of testimony. James Hathaway was found guilty on multiple charges: fraud, elder abuse, forgery, and conspiracy to unlawfully seize assets. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in prison. "You betrayed not only your mother's trust," the judge stated, "but the fundamental duty of family. You weaponized her vulnerability for personal gain. This court finds your actions particularly egregious, given your position of power and your mother's condition." James showed no emotion as he was led away in handcuffs. Margaret sat in the front row, her face a mixture of grief and relief. She'd lost a son to his own greed, but she'd reclaimed her freedom. The pharmaceutical company was restructured. Margaret transferred control to an independent board of directors with strict oversight provisions. Edward took a position focused on ethical compliance, a role he approached with genuine dedication. "I won't let our company become a tool for exploitation again," he told reporters. "My mother built this empire to heal people, not harm them." 2 days after the sentencing, Margaret came to visit Ella and Mary in their small quarters behind the estate. She moved slowly, still recovering, but her eyes held clarity they hadn't possessed in months. "I owe your daughter more than life itself." Mary started to protest, but Margaret raised her hand gently. "Please let me finish. I'm giving you both a small apartment in the city center. It's yours free and clear. And Ella, there's a full academic scholarship waiting for you at any school you choose." Ella's eyes widened, but Margaret continued. "Those are just practical things. What I really want to say is this. The world told me I was powerful because I had money and influence. But when I needed saving, none of that mattered. What saved me was a girl who cared more about right and wrong than about keeping her place." She took Ella's hands in her own weathered ones. "This world needs more people willing to say, 'That isn't your medicine,' than it needs people who know but stay silent." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Mary wiped tears from her eyes. "You've given us so much already. I've given you a fraction of what you gave me." Margaret's voice was firm. "You gave me my mind back, my autonomy, my future. No amount of money equals that." The media continued their coverage, but the narrative shifted. Ella wasn't just the maid's daughter anymore. She became a symbol. Teen hero exposes corporate corruption. When courage came from the smallest voice. The girl who saved a billionaire. But Ella didn't enjoy the attention. When reporters camped outside asking for interviews, she declined through Detective Morrison. "I don't want to be famous," she told her mother. "I just didn't want anyone to be hurt." Mary smiled through her own tears. "That's exactly why you're a hero, sweetheart. Real heroes don't do it for recognition." One evening, as they packed their few belongings to move to the new apartment, Ella found something tucked into her journal, a letter from Margaret written in shaky but determined handwriting. "Dear Ella, you're young enough that this world hasn't yet taught you to look away from inconvenient truths. You saw me not as a wealthy woman or a powerful figure, but as a human being who needed help. That kind of sight is rare and precious. I spent 50 years building a company designed to ease human suffering. Yet in my own home I was suffering, and everyone who should have protected me chose comfort instead. Except you. You risked your home, your mother's job, your safety, all to speak 7 words. That isn't your medicine." Those 7 words unraveled a conspiracy. They exposed corruption. They saved not just my life, but my legacy and the thousands of people my company serves. Never let anyone convince you that being just a child or just a servant's daughter means your voice matters less. Truth doesn't care about status. Justice doesn't require a title. You taught me that power without integrity is worthless, and that sometimes the most powerful thing anyone can do is simply tell the truth when lying would be easier. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for speaking up. Thank you for being brave when the world needed you to be. With eternal gratitude, Margaret Hathaway. Ella folded the letter, carefully pressing it between the pages of her journal. Outside, rain began to fall soft and steady, washing the world clean. Mary sat beside her daughter on their small bed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "How do you feel?" Ella thought for a long moment. "Tired. Scared. But also sure that what I did was right, even though it was hard. That's wisdom beyond your years, baby." "Mama." "Yes. Do you think things will really change, or will people forget once the news stops covering it?" Mary kissed her daughter's forehead. "I don't know if the world will change, but we changed. And Mrs. Margaret changed. And maybe that's enough to change the small piece of the world we can actually touch." Through the window, the mansion lights glowed against the darkening sky. Tomorrow they would leave this place behind. A new chapter would begin. But tonight, in their modest room, a mother and daughter sat together in the quiet certainty that truth, no matter how costly, was always worth the price. 1 year after the trial, the Hathaway Charitable Foundation was officially relaunched. The organization focused on supporting orphaned children, providing education, healthcare, and opportunities for those society had overlooked. It was Margaret's way of honoring the girl who had saved her by helping children just like Ella. Ella was invited to speak at the grand opening ceremony. She stood backstage, hands trembling slightly, as hundreds of people filled the auditorium. Donors, journalists, community leaders, all waiting to hear from her. Mary squeezed her hand. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready." But Ella shook her head. "I want to. I have something to say." When her name was called, she walked onto the stage. Lights illuminated her face, no longer the frightened girl in a servant's quarters, but someone who'd found her voice and refused to let it be silenced. The audience applauded, but she waited for silence before speaking. "People keep calling me brave, but I don't think what I did was about bravery." The room leaned in, listening. We all see things that are wrong every single day. We see people being treated unfairly. We see lies being accepted as truth. We see those with power taking advantage of those without it. Her voice grew stronger. Most of us stay quiet. Not because we don't care, but because we're afraid. Afraid of losing our jobs, our security, our place in the world. I was terrified when I spoke up. My hands shook. My voice wavered. I thought we might lose everything. She paused, letting the words settle. But then I realized something. Staying silent wouldn't protect us. It would only protect the people doing wrong. And Mrs. Margaret, someone who'd shown my mother and me kindness, would suffer while I watched. People always think courage means facing the world fearlessly. But sometimes courage is just saying what you see even when your voice shakes. It's choosing truth over comfort. It's deciding that someone else's well-being matters more than your own safety. Margaret sat in the front row, tears streaming freely down her face. Edward sat beside her, his expression one of profound respect. Ella continued. This foundation exists because Mrs. Hathaway built something beautiful with her life. But it almost disappeared because greed tried to steal it. I didn't save her foundation. I just refused to let evil happen in silence. The audience was completely still. Every single person in this room has the power I had. You see things. You know things. And when you speak up, even if your voice shakes, even if you're scared, you change the world. So I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who said 7 words, "That isn't your medicine." And those words mattered. Because truth always matters, especially when it's inconvenient. She took a breath, her final words deliberate and clear. If this story teaches you anything, let it be this: your voice has power. Your observations have value, and silence in the face of wrong is just another form of harm. The auditorium erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Margaret stood, her frail body strengthened by emotion, clapping with tears of pride. Mary stood in the back, hand over her heart, overwhelmed by the woman her daughter was becoming. Edward wiped his eyes unashamedly. After the ceremony, people crowded around Ella, thanking her, sharing their own stories of times they'd spoken up or wished they had. But the moment that mattered most came when Margaret embraced her privately. "You didn't just save my life," the old woman whispered. "You reminded me why I built this company in the first place. To help people. To do good. To leave the world better than I found it." Ella hugged her back. "You would have done the same for me." "I'd like to think so. But you're the one who actually did it." As the sun set over the city, Ella stood by the window of their apartment, the one Margaret had given them. She thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, terrified in the corner of a mansion, watching a pill dissolve too quickly. She thought about the choice she'd made and how it had changed everything. And she smiled, knowing that truth, even when it cost everything, was always worth it. The small apartment overlooked the park. Morning sunlight streamed through the glass windows. Mary prepared tea while Ella sat at the desk writing in her journal. On the table, one of Margaret's old pill bottles rested beside a handwritten note. "Never let anyone else choose your medicine for you." Ella smiled softly, closing her notebook. "I'll remember Mrs. Margaret," she whispered. Outside, birds sang their morning songs. A new chapter for mother and daughter had begun, peaceful, honest, and without fear. The apartment was modest, but filled with warmth. Photos lined the walls, Ella at the foundation opening. Mary smiling at the new kitchen table, Margaret visiting them for tea. There was also a framed newspaper clipping with the headline, "Truth Spoken by the Smallest Voice." Ella didn't read it often. She didn't need reminders of what had happened. She carried those lessons in her heart. Mary joined her at the window, 2 cups of tea in hand. "What are you thinking about?" "How different everything is now. But also, how some things never change." "Like what?" "Like right and wrong. Like speaking up when someone needs help. Like choosing truth even when it's scary." Mary kissed her daughter's forehead. "You've taught me as much as I've taught you, sweetheart." They stood together, watching the world wake up, a world that felt safer, clearer, more honest, because one girl had refused to stay silent. In the distance, the Hathaway building stood tall against the skyline. But it no longer represented power built on deception. Now it represented something else: the possibility of redemption, the importance of accountability, and the enduring strength of truth. Ella raised her teacup toward the window, a small private toast. To courage, to integrity, to speaking up, and to never ever ignoring what you know is wrong. Ella's story isn't just about a switched pill bottle. It's about the silence of conscience. In brightly lit mansions, people easily mistake power for safety. But the small, honest voices are what keep the world from drowning in darkness. Courage isn't shouting. It's daring to speak truth when that truth makes others uncomfortable. Ella didn't just save one life, she saved an entire family from self-destruction through greed. If this story makes you believe that honesty is still the most powerful medicine, comment, "I choose to speak the truth," to spread this simple but profound message. And don't forget to subscribe to Maid's Daughter Stories, so you won't miss these emotional stories where ordinary girls who work as maids do extraordinary things. Because sometimes just one small sentence is enough to change an entire legacy. Where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Let's see how far this message of truth travels around the world.